At this software company, pay negotiations are conducted a little differently. Here, it's your colleague that sets your salary.
Because we trust and we show that transparency, that will be paid back by more trust from the people in the team, in the company, and that will create a positive feedback loop that will benefit everyone.
Buenos Aires-based Ten Pines has an open book management style that allows employees to have a say in all major decisions, including who they hire and how much they're paid. In the final interview of the hiring process, the candidate meets the entire company, around 90 people, who in turn decide if they're a good fit and then their starting salary.
It's important that if this person, new hire, enters the company, then everyone will know the salary and will accept and will acknowledge that it looks, at least with the small information that we have from that person, it looks fair at that time.
3 times a year, the company has a rates meeting in which employees can pitch and present why they deserve a raise before their teammates take a vote.
We live in a market that it's competing all the time for the talent, and of course one of the ways that it competes is by paying and raising salaries all the time. So it's an important aspect that people need to know if they are being paid a first salary or not.
Ten Pines calls this sociocracy, and although it may sound unique, its practices are grounded in a larger trend known as radical transparency.
Right now we're in really fertile ground for this kind of idea to sprout up, and I think we're going to see many things kind of popping up all over the world, many experiments over the next couple of years in this approach.
And so as companies and employees start to look towards a post-pandemic workplace, could honesty really be the best policy?
Radical transparency is a concept that broadly applied just means being super transparent about details that a company or an organization might otherwise choose to keep secret or keep hidden or limited to a certain number of executives or leaders at a company.
Netflix is one of the companies best known for its culture of radical transparency that it says promotes accountability.
Netflix, the company, takes radical transparency very far, and they go so far as to have public discussions or public emails sent out to sometimes hundreds of employees discussing why someone was fired. Sometimes the discussions about why someone is getting fired happen right in front of them so that they have a chance to share all the ways that they made mistakes that led to them no longer working at the company. But they also have policies that people might see as pretty welcome. So for example, they allow their employees to sort of at their discretion make use of their expense account. So that means no one's really tracking their vacation days or their expense spending or things that are useful to this person getting their job done. And the idea is that it's freedom and sort of freedom and responsibility that is given to these employees so that they have a chance to do their job the best they can without being micromanaged.
But you only have to look at Netflix on Glassdoor to see that this approach isn't for everyone.
Anytime you have a company culture that's sort of extreme, you have the chance to attract people for whom it's really a good fit, and you're also going to turn off a lot of people who just feel that this isn't for them. And it may explain why this isn't a more widely adopted thing, because it's difficult and it requires someone at the top really committed to working through the uncomfortable parts of it in order to make it the company culture.
For Netflix, that person at the top is Reed Hastings. He believes the company's success stems from its high-performance culture.
In the traditional industrial paradigm, you have to do something wrong to get let go. You can think of a job as sort of a property right, until you lose it by abusing your position. But if you think about professional sports, if that team is going to win a championship, it has to have a mix of the right players that work well together, that are the absolute best in the world. And so we try to model ourselves like a professional sports team. So highly paid, but you got to earn your position every year. And it's about performance. And, that's not right for everybody. Some people care mostly about job security. Other people care mostly about excellent colleagues and, playing great team ball to achieving something important for the consumers.
And the Netflix numbers seem to show that radical transparency is working. While it fires people at a higher rate than the average US company, people actually choose to leave at a much lower rate.
But you also don't hear about the companies for which this didn't work so well, right? Or the companies that might have gotten to mid-size and then things sort of fizzled out. Or, we look at Netflix and Bridgewater and we see these success stories, but we're also not hearing necessarily the stories where it was hard to keep a company culture going as it grew much bigger, or it was hard to keep it going as the company expanded very quickly.
But beyond company success, how does this high accountability system impact the average employee?
So from a neuroscience perspective, if we think about what the brain is innately craving, like the brain's own goals, one of them is a sense of certainty, like the ability to predict what's going to happen the next second. When you feel uncertain, it activates quite a strong threat response in the brain, which takes your attention away from what you're trying to focus on. When certainty goes up, you activate a reward network in the brain, and your field of view literally opens up. Your perspective and how much you can think about opens up, and your ability to be creative. So one of the things with radical transparency is people have a lot more certainty about what's expected of them, about what great performance looks like in any domain, about what other people are doing, how that compares to what they're doing. So it really increases your access to information, so you can feel a lot more certain about everything that's going on in your world. And this drive for certainty is such a fundamental part of the brain. It's literally one of the brain's intrinsic goals.
And it's not just an increased sense of certainty that can help us do our jobs.
When you give people access to information about who's paid what and how and what they're doing and how the whole business works and the whole infrastructure, people feel a much greater sense of control. They feel like they can make decisions, they feel like they are able to take actions and as a result improve their career or their performance.
While a radical transparency model may check out on a biological level, it definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
As humans, we have incredible neural diversity, right? There are people who thrive under incredible pressure, and in fact, they're really bored unless there's enormous change and uncertainty going on. And there are people who will fall apart if the subway schedule changes. I will say that radical transparency as a concept will suit a number of kinds of organizations or maybe even functions. It doesn't mean necessarily it will suit every person or even necessarily every organization.
It's interesting because I think there are certain companies that have been pushing really hard for radical transparency for a long time, for a decade plus. And it hasn't had quite this moment of, a moment in time in which it became very popular. I think that's because it's probably quite hard to adjust to, and so you see companies who really define themselves as a company culture try to differentiate themselves from other companies by emphasizing radical transparency. But those companies, in my view, remain pretty few and far between.
In addition to the potential legal issues surrounding employee performance and termination transparency, a major hurdle for many companies is making salaries public.
Yep, it's 2021, and women are still being paid less than men for doing the same jobs.
One step in the direction of amending this reality is to have pay transparency.
In the case of pay transparency, there's this pretty strong argument that actually hiding pay between your employees can hold people back. It lets certain employees get paid more and certain employees go underpaid for a long time without knowing. And so there's, I think, a pretty strong argument to be made that pay transparency is more fair.
A 2021 Washington University study found that pay secrecy directly contributes to the continued pay inequality between men and women doing the same role.
I wouldn't be surprised if certain of the more palatable or easy to digest changes that come with radical transparency, say maybe like pay transparency. I think that's something that more companies could get on board with adopting. It's less of a culture shock than changing the way that you do all sorts of feedback or firings or meetings or sensitive things like that. And if that becomes more and more common, then you'll see companies who want to distinguish themselves thinking about, well, what's next? Like, what is something else that we can be changing about how we run our business that's going to make us better and different from our competitors?
A year of remote working has challenged us to rethink many of our traditional work models. And while radical transparency in its most extreme form may not become the norm, some of its central practices, like flexibility, employee autonomy, and openness, may be on the way.
What the pandemic in the last year has done is kind of given a lot of people a lot more clarity about what matters to them, and a lot more willingness to speak up and also vote with their feet. And I think what we're going to see as a result is what might have taken kind of 5 to 10 years to happen, I think it's going to happen in 1 to 2 in terms of organizational culture. I don't necessarily predict a revolution, but I predict some revolutionary approaches are going to start taking hold in organizations in the next couple of years.
We've seen that in a really short amount of time, things change so dramatically, and for some organizations, for example, it was impossible to think like people working from their home all day. And from one day to the other, we're forced to move to that situation, and it's just so that people keep working and things keep moving, and it's possible to do such things.